Good afternoon and welcome to Health System CIO's Partner Perspective Interview Series. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Today we're talking with Imprivata CTO Wes Wright about why identity governance is being touted as an important weapon in the security fight, how to go about implementing it, and what the future of cyber defense may look like. Wes, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Anthony, always a pleasure talking with you.
All right, my friend, let's get started. Tell me about your organization and your role.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Wes Wright, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Imprivata. Been at Imprivata, heck, come April, it'll already be 3 years, believe it or not. Prior to that, I spent 25-ish years on the health delivery organization side at various CIO and CTO roles. My last one, I came out of Sutter Health as the CTO out there. And Imprivata is, a lot of people know us as the tap and go company, the Tito or the Bebo or tap and go folks. But since Gus Melezes, our CEO, came on board five-ish years ago, I think now, he said he had and has a great vision for where Imprivata needs to be and what we should be for healthcare. And that is the digital identity company for healthcare, not just the tap and go company, but we want to be. I mean, one of the things Gus commonly says is, wherever there's a digital identity event in healthcare, Imprivata will be there, and that's the kind of product portfolio, the integrated product portfolio that we've built out. So from provisioning all the way to deprovisioning and everything that happens to digital identity within an organization, Imprivata's got to play in that area. So Imprivata, not just the tap and go company, but your healthcare digital identity company.
Well, we've seen a number of things in the news, so to speak, recently that sort of support your approach around digital identity. Gartner put
Yes,
out a
yes.
report that sort of strongly favored this approach. NIST put out an article about the SolarWinds hack, in which they said, identity governance, digital identity is extremely important.
Yep.
I know you've been talking about this for a long, long time.
Right. A couple of years
So
now, at least. Yeah.
tell me about some of your experiences on the provider side that made you realize that this was so important.
Yeah. It, unfortunately, a good, strong identity governance process is kind of like, I don't know, for lack of better analogy, kind of like plumbing in your house.
Uh-huh.
It's got to be there. It's got to work all the time. And if it's not there, it's a mess, so to speak.
Right.
But nobody likes to spend money on plumbing. It's always better to put in new cabinets or something like that, so that it's all flashy and stuff. So we've neglected, I believe in health IT, we've neglected the identity governance systems, or what Gartner calls identity governance administration, because simply for that reason, the pipes are in the walls and nobody can see it. And so when you do something good in it, you're not being put on the shoulders of the physicians and marched around and lauded.
Mm-hmm.
But I think COVID, not just COVID, but the reports that you mentioned, Anthony, and Gartner coming out saying, hey, if you're going to do digital transformation, don't try and do it without a good IGA system in place, because it's just going to fall on its face. And then the SolarWinds hack that came out and said identity is everything, as in reference to the SolarWinds attack. I think those are just kind of reinforcing what we've known at Imprivata for a while, and what I learned really not initially, but was reinforced when I was out at Sutter doing a desktop transformation project out there. I worked really tightly with the Microsoft folks, and I started hearing from them, identity is the new perimeter, and I kind of a little slow, so it took me a while to figure out what they were talking about there. Okay, yeah, that's kind of, you do control how things get in and out of your network, which is the perimeter, using digital identity. And that's when I first started realizing the importance of digital identity. We as CTO and operational IT in a health delivery organization, what digital identity meant for the longest time was, I got provider A coming on Monday, and she needs to see patients starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So by God, I better have a digital ID ready for her, with the appropriate applications associated with the digital identity, uh, uh, come Monday morning. And the way I do that is I go, hey, provider A is going to do a lot of the same things that provider C is going to do. So I'm just going to copy. I'm going to give provider A what provider C had, not knowing that provider C, was also part of the medical executive committee and had access to those files and folders, and then part of the GME program. So now I just gave provider A, who's a brand new physician, maybe out of school, access to the medical executive committee's stuff. And that's the way we did identity management. And I
Hmm.
put management in quotes. That's the way we did identity management back then. And we've realized that that was the kind of maybe not the way to go, the right way to go about it. And we're starting to see, again, with the Gartner stuff and the NIST and the CISA stuff, we're starting to see folks go, yeah, identity really is important, and kind of woe the horses on what they're doing in identity.
When was this approximately that you would say you had this epiphany, this discussion with Microsoft? What year approximately? I'm just
Uh,
curious.
I'd say 2015, 2016, somewhere
2015.
around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had tried to stand up identity governance systems, and it's hard. You can get caught up in the, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the politics of an identity governance stand up system. Identity governance system stand up pretty easily because there's so many people involved. So, the way an identity governance system works is you take some feeds from like your HR system that have a job code in there, and then that feeds into your identity governance system. And based upon that job code and other demographics, you go, okay, given that job code, I need to give them these applications, and so on. So it kind of, there's a big funnel at the front of your IGA system. Well, included in that big funnel, as you might think, are a lot of different people. So whenever I did used to stand up an identity, tried to stand up an identity governance system, you know, HR, I'd go to HR and say, hey, I need your job codes and how they relate. And that's when HR would take the opportunity to go, we need to bring in a consultant, and we need to rationalize these. I got 5,000 employees, I got 6,000 job codes. And so my IGA stand up would just be kind of ground to a halt while HR did their thing. Then I go to the ERP system and go, hey, look, I need to get these data feeds from you in order to build these identities. And they go, well, we only have our employees in that system. I go, what? What about our contractors? What about our vendors? What about our students? What about our volunteers? Well, we're going to have to come up with a plan to get those into the system. So I'd be stalled again, waiting for them to come up with a plan to get into the system. And then I go over to the chief information security officer and go, hey, I'm standing up an IGA system. And they go, well, we don't really have these really great roles defined. So I'd be waiting again. So that's kind of been why standing up an identity governance system has been so hard. Is it really, we thought about it as a project, but it's not a project. It's an ongoing, everyday kind of thing. And to get the momentum and the collaborative momentum going in an organization is just uh, trying, let's say. So that's historically been the issue around, and I see a lot of my friends that are still out there on the HDO side, not a lot, but a few, that have inherited some of those systems where they have consultants in helping them determine these different pieces and parts, and really their IGA system just kind of sitting on the shelf was, it's become shelfware while they're doing all this other stuff. So it's not only is it not sexy, IGA. I mean, it's also it's a really hard collaboration effort for a health delivery organization to get going. Um, Imprivata, we do it a different way. We kind of we cheat to some
Yeah.
degree. You know, again, we're uh, at one point, because of the success that we've had with Imprivata One Sign, the Tap and Go, the Bibo, the Bibo, the Tito, because of the success of that, we were kind of pigeonholed as the tap on, tap and tap off company. But uh, uh, one, I think we've broken out of that silo. But two, now we're using the strength that comes with that, because as people in a facility have been badging in and badging out, sometimes for years, uh, we can actually be a one sign, see the data, see the applications that they've been badging into and out of. So now we can take that data. You can tell me, John, Jane, Pete, Paul, so on and so forth are ICU nurses. So I'll just pull the data out on one side and say, okay, what have Paul, Pete, John, and Jane been tapping into over the last year? What applications have they been using? So then I can take that data and stuff it into my Imprivata identity governance solution, and I can come up with, here's the ICU role, and here's the applications that they have to use during their ICU job. So I shortcut all that big funnel at the beginning to try and get the roles and everything defined with the HR and the ERP systems and so on. I can shortcut that by using Imprivata One Sign data to define the roles based on what they had been using in the past. So that allows us at Imprivata to stand up. We can get people running, get that software off the shelf in 5 or 6 months for 5 or 6 different applications. It's a new way to think about identity governance rather than letting that big front end process drive the role based access controls. We're using data to drive the role based access controls.
So all the situation you described, the difficulties you had about having to go to each department and get
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
going, you're saying that you use a vendor like Imprivata, and that a lot of that goes away. How much of it goes away and how much is still hard work left to be done? We know there's some left, right?
Yeah,
So we don't want to make it seem too rosy. What are they in for? Even if they get a company like Imprivata, what's the CTO, CIO in for to make this a success? What do you need before you even go get the vendor like Imprivata?
yeah,
What groundwork do you need to lay? And then once you bring in Imprivata, all vendors need their customers to do
right.
certain things to be successful, right? So take me
Yep.
through some of that.
Yeah, I think a good question, Anthony. The first thing um, you have to do is realize that identity governance, it isn't a project. It's a program. It's something, it's just like clinical operations. You don't do a clinical operations project. Clinical operations are something that you sustain over the life of your organization. Well, identity governance isn't a project. You'll have milestones and stuff like a project might have, but it's something that you sustain over the life of your organization. So first, you got to get that into the mindset, and then you mentioned some folks that I have to collaborate with. Um, but it's one that you did leave out was the CISO. And
Hmm.
since identity is really becoming that control plane for determining everything that happens within a network, the CISO's involvement is really key right there at the front. So the first thing I do now is one, get in the right mindset. It's a program, not a project. Yeah, I want to see some value returned as soon as I possibly can. But I know that I can't just put my superstar IT person on identity governance for 6 months and then pull her or him off that project and it'll run by itself. Now you've got to have some resources. And actually, I've seen this geez, over the last 6 months, at least three really relatively large health systems I know of have actually hired vice presidents of identity and access management. So we're starting to see that trend, that mind shift from project to program really
Hmm.
start to be, put the people are putting their money where their mouth is on this, and I'm really happy to see that. So you've got to get those people that are part of that funnel that I talked about at the beginning, the CISO, the HR person, the your business folks, even people don't think about it, but your CMO, your chief medical officer has to be involved in this too. And you've really got to evangelize to them why identity governance is important. Again, it's really kind of plumbing that they never usually see. They just expect it to be there. So you got to set out to them, this is what identity is, and this is how important it is in the life cycle, in the day-to-day work that your clinicians do. And then once you have them on board as champions, most of them sit on the exec council, facility exec council with you. And so then it's not just the IT guy who wants to put in some technology to make life easier for his IT folks. No, it's the whole organization that then realizes identity is everything in today's world. And we have to have a much better methodology for managing our identities than what we've had before.
Do
So
you
that's
see?
that is the big hard work right at the beginning that has to be done no matter what technology you buy, Anthony.
Do you think you need a specific committee with some of these folks you mentioned that would meet at some regular intervals?
I think you in healthcare, we love our committees, as you know. But I think I think it could be a maybe a sub or an agenda item on your already established committees. I don't think you need to stand up a separate committee for identity and access management. I think it would probably fall pretty well into some of the other committees that you already have. You're even in your boards, like most boards have a security committee. I think an update on identity and identity governance in that security committee's board presentation would probably uh, serve you well. Not to say that you wouldn't have a bunch of working groups that would give data into that security committee, but I don't think you need to have a separate. Uh,
Okay.
and this is, of course, just Wes's opinion after doing this for a while. I don't think you have to have a separate
Okay.
committee for that.
You mentioned some new titles with identity governance in it.
Hmm.
If an organization doesn't have one of those, who do you see typically running this program? Well, we said it's not a program.
Program, not a project. Yeah,
Right. It is a program.
right.
Okay,
Yes, it is a
gotta get
program.
my terms right. So who do you see running this program, championing it?
Yeah.
Title.
One or two folks right now. We're really starting to see, and I think this is because the security side of the house is pushing this hard. The HISAC came out with their white paper that essentially said, "Hey, CISOs, this identity stuff is pretty important, so you might want to pay attention to it." So they came out with that, and then they came out with their framework, which we based our digital identity framework around. So I think because you're starting to see the security side of the house push identity management so much, we're actually starting to see the security side of the house, the CISO or somebody within the
Mhm.
CISO's office,
Mhm.
really take up the banner for identity governance or identity management, let's call it.
Mhm.
Prior to that, you'd see it in operations. Like as a CTO, I was responsible for identity management in many of my places, and that was because it was an operational thing. It was back to that regular example. Nurse Jane's coming in on, or Dr. Jane's coming in on Monday, and we need to make sure she has all of her stuff. Well, that was always thought of as an operational IT facilitation thing, not a security thing. And so it fell within the IT operations, because I was the one that caught hell for it if she couldn't see patients at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I wanted to have some control over it.
So a couple things there. When you described the example of you putting in specific credentials for one individual, it makes me think that something like that can't possibly scale when you have thousands of providers coming in and out, on and off. That those can't all be one-off requests to Wes, and then you
No.
sit there and do it. So is that another reason we want to automate this with some software?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is an area that just begs for automation. I'm a little sad that um, AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and artificial intelligence came onto the market so soon, because RPA, robotic process automation, didn't really get its time in the sun. And I think there is so much stuff, so many areas within healthcare IT, within all other processes, that when you apply that RPA, that robotic process automation, to a process, that you could become so much more efficient than what you are right now. And identity governance, like you said, Anthony, is a huge one of those. We used to, and a lot of places still do. Yeah, Wes couldn't do it, but if we had 40 Wes's sitting in a room and took a ticket, a ticket
Mhm.
from the ticketing system, and did my hands on the keyboard, well, then I could brute force it that way. But then I've got 40 people doing the same repetitive task over and over, day in, day out. They're not having any fun doing it, and we're spending a bunch of money doing it. So let's put some automation, some robotic process automation around that.
And we know there's mistakes being made.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned taking a similar profile and replicating it, but
Yep.
then having to make adjustments based on your knowledge of what the previous profile had that this one shouldn't. It
Right.
sounds like that's just rife for mistakes. And if you have mistakes here, you have security openings, problems.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That initial example, it's I had a new provider coming in, and everybody knows that, it's because he's not here. Let's pick on Sean.
my
Everybody,
my buddy,
our chief medical officer, by the way.
great guy.
Everybody knows that Sean has been a physician here, and kind of does the same physician-y stuff as Jane's going to do when she gets here on Monday. So let's just copy Sean's profile, and that'll get Jane set. Well, Sean also, is a member of the medical executive committee, and actually happens to be the director of the graduate medical education program, and so on and so on. So now Nurse Jane, who's barely finding her way around the system because we've made it so complicated. Well, it is complicated. We haven't made it complicated, but it is. She's barely, and all of a sudden she's got access to all the medical executive committee records and the GME records, and that in and of itself is, we CISOs will preach least privilege. That is
Right,
not least privilege.
right.
So yeah, there's tons of those mistakes going on, all unwitting mistakes, mind you, but tons of those mistakes going on all the time when you try and brute force an identity governance system.
What I was thinking is, we talked about who's going to run this, and you mentioned security folks, and I'm thinking that if you're clinicians, IT running a project is not what you want to hear, or IT pushing a project, right? And then even probably below that is the
Hmm.
security folks pushing
Right.
a project. So do you need to is the convincing argument here to tie what you're doing to system availability and thus to patient care and patient safety? Is that what
Yeah.
is going to work to get those clinicians to engage with a CISO on a digital identity or governance program?
Yeah, that's that hard work that we talked about up front. That you had to get that group of people that fed into the identity governance system funnel. You had to sit them down. They had to become the champions for the project. And I put CMO in there
Yeah.
because it is an availability for that new nurse Jane that comes in on Monday morning. It's an availability issue, not just for her, but it's a we don't ever want, and IT folks never want this. CISOs never want this. We don't ever want IT to stand in the way of a clinician being able to provide care to a patient, especially in an emergent situation. If Nurse Jane, if all the physicians needed access to the ED module or to the trauma module, and the Sean that we copied didn't have access to it, then when Jane got there, saw a trauma patient, couldn't get into the specialty narrator or something to do something. Well, we've just delayed the care to that patient. So we never want to do that. So it is a patient safety issue.
And I even
It's a
mean,
it's a
I,
clinical issue.
I even mean beyond that, beyond them getting the proper roles so they can do what they want to do. I mean that if you don't do identity right, you open yourself to breaches,
Oh
and the
yeah,
system goes down, and now you have a real system. Now nobody can get on the system type
yeah.
thing.
That's absolutely true. We had just this last year, I saw a post from Drex about potentially the first patient death that was associated with a breach type event. It was in Germany, where there was a ransomware that took down a healthcare system. A patient was being transported there and was diverted because, hey, don't bring them here because we can't see them because all of our systems are down. That patient was diverted somewhere else and ended up uh, dying because of that diversion, which was caused by that ransomware attack. So yeah, it's a huge issue. I keep going back to that NIST. That NIST had that conference around the solar winds attack, and Jay Gasley, I think, one of the CISA analysts, came out with one of my favorite quotes. They said, once was, I'm paraphrasing, uh, uh, come to find out, everything around this attack, that this attack, with this attack, identity is everything. And that's, if you don't know, one, that the identities that are on and moving about your network are who they are who you think they are, or what you think they are, because there are the non-human identities, um, but they are what you think they are. One, you have to know that, and then two, you have to know what they're allowed to do, and then three, you have to know when they're doing things that they aren't allowed to do. And then when you see a solar winds type of attack, and you see a normal user that is elevated rights, move from this PC to this PC, and in between there, once they got to this PC, they elevated their rights somehow, hacked, and then they moved to this server. Well, a normal user shouldn't be doing that. And so
Right.
it's a three-step process. First, you've got to have verified digital identities. Then you got to know what they're supposed to do, and then you got to know when they're doing things that are outside of what they're supposed to do. And that's why the HISAC, I think that's why, because it didn't say this in the white paper, but that second white paper they put out, when they put out their HISAC framework, they said use a unified system for your identity and access management. And I would suppose that that's why they said that, so that you can see what's happening in those three major buckets of digital identity, using a single pane of glass to kind of check things.
Let me. We've got time for about one more question. So if we have healthcare IT executives from the hospitals and health systems, they're listening to this. You have those that are true believers. You have, let's look at a
Yeah,
spectrum. You have those that are true believers, and they're off and running, and they're doing this, and they're working hard. I guess at the other end of the spectrum, you might have smaller institutions that don't have either the bandwidth, the resources. I don't know. And then in the middle, what's in the middle? What's the average? What's going on right now with the average? What do you want to say to the people in the middle right now?
yeah. I think the people in the middle right now, they recognize, uh, that identity governance is a problem, identity management, let's call it identity management, encapsulating the whole system, that identity management is an issue. They don't, they can't 100% those three buckets say check, 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 and they want to get there. But the problem in health IT, and it's been this way, for the 25 years that I've been in it, is, you know, they got 10 pounds worth of work in a 5-pound bag to put it in. And every time they want to um, fix something, let's say, uh, every time that they know that they're adding work. And so they have to, in their minds, go, okay, this is a big project. It's a lot of work. Identity governance systems is a lot of work. Even if you do it with Imprivata, it's still a lot of work. And where am I going to find that work, given all the other work that is on my folks' plate? And you've got of course, you got the COVID stuff that came up initially with the building tents and new networks, and then you had the surge of people coming on board, and then people moving roles, ambulatory nurse over into the COVID ward, and you had to switch roles and stuff like that. Actually, folks are learning. That's why a lot of them are going right now. We're seeing a big uptake in that. A lot of folks are going, man, I don't want to go through this again. We talked about the spaghetti bowl before
Mm-hmm.
on this.
Yep.
They created this big bowl of spaghetti, and now I got to unwind it. I don't want to do that again. So I'm just going to throw that spaghetti away and build something that isn't going to be spaghetti. So we're starting to see a lot of interest that way. But and now with the vaccine rollout, you've got even more HIT demand out there. So it's a matter of prioritization, and I think that given the security and the operational and the clear demonstration during the COVID crisis of how important digital identity is, that identity governance project, identity management project, is really floating its way up into, it might have been number 15
Mm-hmm.
or 20 on the list of things to do. Oftentimes we're seeing it pop up in the top 5 now, but it always has been, always will be, I think. These are smart folks out there. The CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, they're smart folks. They know that identity is everything. It's a matter of how can I reprioritize resources to get to this, and frankly, it's a lot of how do I sell it to the rest of my executive staff that I can't do this clinical project for my doctors, for my clinicians,
Right.
because I want to do identity governance. And that's why it's so important up front that you build this cadre of champions for identity governance in that executive suite.
Excellent stuff, Wes. I think this is going to be extremely valuable to a lot of people who listen. You always give the great perspective, got that provider side background. So
Thank you.
good stuff. And I want to thank you.
Hey, thanks, Anthony. Like I said, always a pleasure talking to you.
All right, Wes. Have a great day.
Hey, you too.
All right.